Alrighty. So word has it that we are going live and that we are live. So here I am. I am KatmanU, psychic empath and psychic wrangler. Before we see who I wrangled in today's show, I want to welcome you to Third Eye Salon, where in each and every show, we take a fresh look between the veils of reality. And today we are looking between the veils of megalithic sites and their true power with Master Dowser Maria Wheatley, all the way from the UK. And before we say hello to Maria, let's say hello to my bestie, Linda Coulter-Burge. How are you doing, Linda?
I am doing wonderful, and because I use Pendulum in most of the work that I do, I am so excited to talk with Maria and expand that. I remember the first time that I was introduced to it when my dad told me I was witching, and I thought he was calling me a witch. So I just am so excited to introduce this to everyone because it's such an incredible tool, and Maria is an incredible teacher. So wonderful. For all you who are joining us for the first time, I'll be your live stream chat host. And my rule is very simple: play nice or get out. I will give you a little warning, maybe. And my goal is that we have a safe environment for everyone to question, to share. It's fine to question things. I love when people question things and have great conversation about it. So please do that. Do it with respect, okay? Also make sure that you like, share, and subscribe so that more people find this wonderful channel and the wonderful people that we bring on, like Maria. And if you can't watch us on YouTube, remember we're also on Spotify and on Apple. And even if you watch us here, if you go there and give us a like, it does really help. It helps boost us in the rankings. So please do that. And with that, our Facebook group. Thank you for our Facebook group. And also everything that we are talking about, we'll probably continue on talking about there. So I love, if you haven't joined our Facebook group, to join Third Eye Salon. Below, you'll also find a place where you can buy us coffee. That's the only way this is financed. So please, if you enjoy the content, buy Kat a cup of coffee, okay? Because he does a lot of work to bring this together. And with that, Maria, I am so happy to meet you. I'm really looking forward to this next, as long as we have you. I'm going to say an hour, but I'm really hoping it's longer than an hour.
It's a couple hours. We got her.
Yay.
Thank
So
you.
welcome, Maria.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we're also going to say hello to our lovely co-host, Radiant Angela Anderson, artist, former software engineer, crafter of cycles of motor, and also shaman. How are you, Angela?
I'm doing well this morning. I hope you guys are all doing great. I'm so excited to speak with Maria this morning. I'm so familiar with that work, and I'm excited to get into how the earth energies correlate to the human energies. The human energetic system is really where my fascination lies. So I'm really excited to get into the conversation today. So welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to go through Maria's bio, because if you don't know who she is, you really should. Her history is just... So Maria is a second-generation dowser who was taught by European master dowsers, her late father, and Chinese geomants. She is a leading authority on earth energies, ley lines, and ancient megalithic sites. Maria is the UK's foremost dowser of the geodetic system of earth energies and runs tours to sacred sites worldwide. She is an accomplished author of many books on sacred sites and dowsing. Maria discovered the Neolithic long-headed, long-lost civilization of Stonehenge, realized that they had a mythical appearance, and memories of them were woven into legends. She has studied Neolithic Britain and Bronze Age prehistory at Bath and Oxford University, and works closely with Gaia's healing energies, such as her deep waters that emit dowsable energy spirals and circles that can help the body to heal itself. Maria is also a druid who follows the Celtic path, and she has also written diploma courses and runs esotericcollege.com, which offers certificated courses on holistic subjects, including past life regression, druid astrology, tarot, and dowsing. Maria teaches advanced dowsing techniques, which are not taught anywhere else in the world. So please do give us a thumbs up if you are excited to learn more about Maria's research and her discoveries with dowsing megalithic sites. So Maria, what I really want to do first is kind of get to know you so our audience can fall in love with you. And how is it for you growing up with your father's work influencing you, and what was your mom's role in this, and like who were you as a little girl? Like kind of unpack your origin story for us, if you will.
Yeah, well, really, I've kind of lived and breathed ancient sites all of my life through my family, and especially my late father. We just went around the world. And for example, even from the ages of 11 to 15, I was in the United States, living in Pennsylvania, and looking at sites like Cahokia, Serpent Mound, for example, the Toltec Mounds. And I used to go back to the high school and say about the ancient history of America. And even the teachers didn't know of these sites of like Woodhenge in Illinois and you know, other places besides. So I've know ancient America to some regard from my childhood. I've recently been back to Charco Canyon just last month. And I've also dowsed with my family sites in France and Spain and Portugal. So really it was growing up with dowsing rods in my hand and a pendulum in my back pocket and walking the ley lines and the earth currents with wonder, with excitement, with a sense that we've all remembered this from the past, and hence my interest in past life regression, because I also led Dolores Cannon's tours to ancient sites here as well. So I knew Dolores very well. So I kind of have one foot in the past with the ancestors and one foot in the future, rather, trying to link the two, because I believe if we utilize the earth energies as did our ancestors, we can help others heal themselves, heal their houses, and live in harmony with Gaia.
Yeah, I remember I was watching more of your videos yesterday, and it was like, if you douse to your house, you can find out where, I think it was negative green energy, I believe, like where that's, I mean, I might be crossing my information here, but it was like, you want to know where the energy things are, the energy alignments is in your house, because if you don't, then you can make yourself quite ill. And so hopefully you can maybe break some of that down for us as well, so people can be aware of the do's and don'ts. And yeah, I think in general, the intent to dumb down America has been really successful. And we are so disconnected from the land. We are so disconnected from our history and from the history of the indigenous people. So it's fantastic that you were able to walk through, discover these things, and probably felt, how was high school for you here in America? That had to be such a disconnect, because like England's educational system is so like, it's like, you're going to learn, you're going to know all this by this age. And if you don't, like, you're going to go back and you're going to get it. And here it's like crowd control, basically. So I'm wondering what that was like for you.
It was a cultural shock. It really was, because it's really a different culture. But, you know, it taught me to be very adaptable. So I think I've got a lot of adaptability from going from one culture to another. And then my family lived in the south of France for a while, so I had that culture as well. So I think we can learn from one another's cultures as well, and realize that at the end of the day, we're all human. We're all, you know, generally speaking, positive people living positive lives.
That's very generous. So would you kind of break down for us what geomancy is? Because for some people, that's going to be the first time they've heard like geomants, and what's a geomance and what's geomancy, and kind of walk us through that.
Geomancy, yes, it's a word that means geo, earth, and mancy means divination. So it means the divination of the earth, like pyromancy is the divination of fire, hydromancy is the divination of water, and aeromancy is the divination of air. So geomancy falls in with the four elements of mancy, of divination, knowing a knowing of. So geomancy is really about getting to know the earth and understanding different types of energies that Gaia admits. And like you mentioned earlier, some can be positive, some can be negative. So really geomancy is the art of the earth. But I like to think it's about forming a relationship with Gaia. But it is an ancient science, geomancy. It has its roots 4,500 years ago in the written word in ancient China, where an emperor was literally a dowser, and he used to raise the fertility of the Chinese landscape with his dowsing abilities. Cleopatra of ancient Egyptian fame, she employed geomancers, dowsers as well. So dowsing falls into the art of geomancy, and a person that dowses and decodes the land is a geomancer. So you can be a geomancer studying the geomantic art of lost wisdom.
Wow. I didn't even know that you could, that was, what was it for fire? What was that called?
Pyromancy.
Pyromancy. I've never heard that before. Can you just tell me how that works?
Well, you see, if we look to the wisdom of the tarot, you have the magician who's normally got one hand to the air and one below, as above and so below. And before him, the magician has all of the 4 elements, and those 4 elements fall into the divination arts. So pyromancy, imagine a really dark sky and a fire in front of you, and the flames flicker and the wood pops and makes noises. So fire can be noisy and it can be very visual, and a good pyromancer would be able to form a divination system through the flames and through the sound of that the fire makes. So it's about concentration. You could look into water, hydromancy, like you would a crystal ball, and it's having that concentration and that focus, but being connected to that element. So if you're a kind of fire person, well, you're going to get on with pyromancy. If you're more watery, imagine that you could look into a pool of water and understand that that too can communicate with us. It's the way the elements communicate with us. That's at the heart of these mancies.
You're also like a master teacher. The way you unpack things is so succinct. Yeah, I'm a double fire sign, so I'm like, oh,
there you go.
Yeah. I see you came off mute, Angela. Did you want to hop in?
I was just going to say it's like a scientific or logical description for the path of a shaman. The path of a shaman, what a shaman actually does. It's communing with the elements, communing with nature, being able to read and decipher nature. So yeah, it's all in line. So my question is, I'm so curious because everything is everything, as above, so below, right? As we get in tune with the energetic system, that is us, like the Kundalini, the chakra system, it's kind of like once you start to understand that, you can see it reflected in the earth itself. And so the earth has its energetic centers, and they expand beyond the major chakra points. There are meridians all throughout the earth, likened to the human nervous system, right? And so it's almost like, well, it's not like, but it is the fact that you have those centers that correspond to the feminine and the masculine, or the light and the dark. And there's an opportunity to connect those energies, the earth energies, to the cosmic energies. And so since the earth is reflective of the human being, I'm curious to know your perspective on the role of the human being as serving as the bridge between the cosmic and the earth. What is the role of the human being in helping to harmonize and facilitate those energies, in serving as the bridge? What's our role as the bridge between the two?
I think our role is like a diamond. It can be multifaceted at times. So, for example, working with the earth energies and the heavens, it is almost like it happens at once, you know. And we're working with our chakra systems with energy lines is absolutely amazing, because the more in Druidry, the more that we work on ourselves and work with the land, the more that we're helping Gaia expand in her consciousness, because we're expanding in our consciousness, which helps to connect with the solar family, the solar family, which is all to do with, you know, our souls. So the way I see it is literally the more that we work with the land, the more that we expand our wisdom, you know, above and beyond. And that's where kind of lake lines and earth currents can come in, because you mentioned the chakra system, and the ancients were so aware of what the lays and earth energies did. So I'm going to take you to Glastonbury Abbey, okay? And your viewers can, you know, Google it and have a look. It looks ruinous at the moment, and it is, because it was, you know, ransacked centuries ago. But this is what the geomancers of old did to align the abbey onto an earth current, a female earth current. And imagine an earth current like a river that entwines a ley line. So you've got a ley line, and you've got a female current entwining it, and you've got a male current entwining it. That's a ley system, okay? And at Glastonbury, they put St. Mary's Church over the female earth current because she pulses several times. Imagine like a spike of energy coming up, and that sets the axis line where you'd walk down the center of the church from the far end to the altar. And there's 7 pulse points which we can work with our chakras. We can work with 1 pulse point for the base chakra, and as we're moving up towards the holiest of holies, the altar, by the time we've activated the crown chakra on this energy system, we are at the altar in an altered state of consciousness, with our whole of our chakras in harmony with the land, with the female earth current, with the mother church, and with one another. So in the Christian way of activating the chakra system at birth in the United Kingdom, they just put a cross of water above the third eye chakra, which is ineffective unless all of the chakras are opened. This is the glory of the landscape. And we have these energy currents and lanes that can have these pulsing points that we can work with. And I've taken hundreds of people to Glastonbury Abbey and hundreds of people to other sites that do this, all of whom feel they have benefited.
Yeah. So I have a follow-up question. So I know that things change, like the earth is changeable. Everything changes all the time, right? I'm curious to know if you believe that there are opportunities for a similar setup in areas like the United States, for instance, because I know there's not a sacred site that's likened to Glastonbury in the United States, but is there opportunity that there may now exist something to that effect that can potentially be activated? And I'm curious to know if that's our path. I feel like that's a draw. Somewhere within my consciousness, it feels like there's a draw. There's an opportunity to connect the human energetic system to the land in that way, to create a sense of harmony and balance across the physical landscape.
Yes, I mean, that's you've raised a very good point, but really there is a similarity between so many sites in the United States to the United Kingdom and the ancient British Isles. For example, Charco Canyon, built by the Anasazi people, the ancestors of the Hopi, who were not nomadic. They built a 4-story building with 700 rooms, okay, in a desert, in a landscape that showed no fertility, but they lived there very well. So when we kind of look to ancient America, it does have similarities. That Chaco Canyon and the great houses there are very similar to the Templar churches built in the 12th century in England. They too were built between 970 and the 12th century. The consciousness, perhaps, in America, akin to the Templars, may be controversial thoughts, but I think there are similarities. Then if we go to another ancient site in America, America's Stonehenge, that's very similar to the Neolithic monuments here. So I see a great places in America that attracted Chaco Canyon at Four Corners, attracted thousands and thousands of people each year, because when you put people, a mass amount of people together at a sacred site, like Avebury in England, a massive stone circle can house up to 2,000 people. Same for Chaco Canyon. Imagine all of those people switched on into a similar consciousness. What that can do and achieve in yesteryear, I believe can be done now. You can remotely tap into things as well. You don't have to be there physically. You could tap into Stonehenge if you felt that's what the energies there you wanted to work with. So there are similarities, even though, you know, there's thousands of miles between our two lands.
Would you be able to discover like sacred energy patterns and create a site? You know, because I feel like it's laying there in wait. Those patterns are laying in wait to be discovered, right? Like Angela that could be part of her work, where she discovers that and then creates something around that to activate it.
Absolutely. But you see, the ancients had a design canon. So by a design canon, I mean they would look for particular energies that would mark the esoteric center of place, never the geometric center. They wouldn't put an energy pattern in the geometric. They put it quite close to the geometric center. And you can find those in the landscape. You know, they are there. So if you found them, I mean, let's say, for example, you wanted to have a new hospital created, you know, in your community. We'll get a geomancer in and decode the land, and then you could start to find the right place where you could put people in that needed energy into a high energy zone, you know, recuperating, and people that are going into, you know, for operations, into a soothing, calming energy. So I see the past as being very relevant for any type of build. You know, any type of build that would benefit humanity and communities. And, you know, we can do that. We can look at that template. We can look at that design canon and say, okay, we can replicate that. And it could be a sacred site in your back garden. Find the best energies there and work with those energies. And it's really simple in which to do so.
My goodness, this is so exciting.
Yeah, you said a whole mouthful just now. Like, that's a whole mouthful. That's a whole
download.
Yeah, that's a whole download and a new way of thinking about communing with the land in order to facilitate and benefit your own health and well-being. Because not only is it beneficial for you, but it's beneficial to the land in that it will promote growth and renewal and nurturance of what is produced by the earth, so it can bring forth higher yield in terms of provisions for the human being. So it's just a matter of learning to work with the land. I think this discussion highlights the need for awareness in that regard. Yeah, and
yes,
that, because you can do it while the ancients set the template, we can bring it home, so to speak, to the backyard and work with our own yards, work with our own spaces to that effect, and bring up things that benefit us. Work with the land in that way, commune with the land. Yeah.
Beautifully said, you know, and that is wonderfully put, because we can. There is nothing stopping us apart from a little bit of awareness. That's it. Yeah, and it really is. And so for your viewers and your listeners, for example, we've all heard of the vortexes at Sedona. I'm sure everyone England knows about the vortexes of Sedona. But if you just look carefully at how trees grow, and those trees that twist as they grow, that's a sign of a vortex. So if you go near that tree that twists, you're in vortex energy that can shift, your own energy. So we call it a geomancer's eye. Okay, we say that if you've got a geomancer's eye and you look towards nature, what nature's doing, that can help us decode the energies in the land. For example, so just a twisty tree is one sign, and another sign of underground water that can be very beneficial to our health, because you've got two types of water I'll talk about in a moment. But one type, which is especially beneficial, born within the earth herself, yew trees, hemlock trees are attracted to. Okay, so again, you just have to look for these types of trees. And we call them rooks. They're kind of like a blackbird. They're kind of like a raven, but they've got a grey beak. I really don't know the equivalent in the United States. I should do, but apologies, I don't. But they're a communal bird, and wherever they nest, they're by that water. And if you have a horse, okay, anyone that's got a horse, watch where the horse lies. Horses and cows will lie only on good earth energy. And there's a very old saying in England, going back to the medieval times, build your farmhouse where the cows or sheep doth lie, because they know what's good for them. We've kind of forgotten that. So just by a little bit of observation of where certain animals go, we can start to understand the types of energy.
I want you to talk about water, but we had a couple of people that asked questions, so I want to really honor that. So Patricia asks, do the Earth's energy lines shift or stay exactly where they lay, for example, 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago? So do the ley lines move?
That's a really good question, Patricia. So, thank you for bringing that up. According to the master dowsers, such as Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, and many others that have looked into placement of earth currents and ley lines flowing through sacred sites, it seems that they have permanence. The ones in the United Kingdom do. For example, you've got a very famous ley line called the St. Michael ley line, and it goes right across the kind of west and east of England. Avebury's on it, Glastonbury Tor's on it, and numerous ancient sites. And they were built 5,000 years ago, some of those ancient sites, and they're on that line, and that line still exists. So that line alone is 5,000 years old. So it's really kind of embedded into the British landscape. So there's one school of thought that says they're permanent. I think a lot of them are permanent, but there are some lines that seem to be more movable. It's a bit like if you can imagine that you've got a really stalwart oak tree that's like a permanent land, but you get trees popping up elsewhere, and those lines can in effect move to some regard. But the ones that are anchored in with ancient sites, it's like acupuncture. You've got your meridian line, bump, you put an ancient site on it, bump, that gives permanence. The ones that don't have all of these ancient sites on tend not to have such permanence. That's what the ancients were doing. They were embedding a system into the landscape.
Oh my God, that's such a revelation. So Lisha asks, are energy alignments in homes similar to Feng Shui?
That again, you've got some really good, knowledgeable people asking some great questions. So thank you. Yes, well, it is. I mean, for example, the art of placement, Feng Shui, is, if you align a mirror here, some wind chimes here. Now that's fantastic, the art of placement. It really is. But if you're on fundamental negative earth energies, all the placement in the world is not going to work. Okay, so the early Chinese geomancers from one particular school would read how the energies flow through the land. For example, I mentioned earlier the Mary current that flows around the ley, and the Michael current, like a strand of DNA or a Caduceus symbol, that ley system I mentioned. The ancient Chinese, when I worked with them in England, said Mary, it's a Christianized name, you know, and they said, no, white tiger, she's powerful. Michael, for example, would be the Archangel Michael. You gracefully called in his energy earlier. To the ancient Chinese, that's the Azure dragon. So you have these powerful, all cultures relate to them. They might call them different things. So the ancient Chinese in Feng Shui would look to where the dragon lines crossed, and where the dragon lines cross, Mary and Michael, for example, they called them lines, but they're like rivers of energy. That's where the emperor would put his house or his tomb, for example.
I think it's fascinating that, you know, I don't think of geomancy and the Chinese culture. Again, there's just like a veil of ignorance that I'm walking around in. So to pop that open and say, yeah, they, you know, the ancient people of China knew this, their emperors used it. It wasn't, you know, it was wisdom, it was power. And of course they were aware of it.
And like I say, even in ancient America, they align things to with the Chinese would call them dragon lines. Actually, the technical word in China is long mei, the dragon's breath. That's long mei.
Wow.
So they would call all of these currents long mei. And lo and behold, anyone that would amplitate long mei. So what I mean by that is when the English, I must admit in their arrogance, went to Hong Kong, okay, and they decided that they were going to build railroads and roads, and the Chinese were in abject horror saying, but you will amplitate the dragon lines. No, 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 we're going to build this. And they created Happy Valley, the English, and Happy Valley it was not, because once they'd amplitated too many of the long mei, disaster fell on them. And the Happy Valley even today has its problems in drugs and in many different vices as well. So if we just heed the ancients' awareness and allow these energies to free flow, and even if they have been amputated with a road, we imagine them to be healed and have that energy flowing through it, we can heal that system. We really can. And that's what a lot of geomancers do. They breathe new life and breath into long mei, the breath of the dragon.
This is just so exciting. Miss Linda, please hop in.
Okay, so I've been listening, and one of the questions that I continually have, I sense a grid of lines going in different directions. So can you help me understand ley lines versus other types of energetic lines that
Great
we
question.
have and how that affects? And are there times where when they cross that can create unease and dis-ease, or that it's a positive thing?
Grid lines are, we imagine them to be sort of all over Gaia, you know, making a kind of grid system. But again, if we turn to ancient Chinese wisdom of geomancy, Feng Shui, as they would call it, energy travels too fast along a straight line. Okay, and that's why in ancient China they have bowed roofs. They want to slow chi down. So energy travels really fast along grid lines and lanes. So in Chinese wisdom and in geomancy wisdom, you need to slow that energy down. And especially a crossing point of lays that are straight lines or a grid system, then that is really powerful. Now, the difference between a ley and a grid is literally like, imagine throwing a fishnet over Gaia, and you've got all of these interlacing squares. You've got the Hartmann grid, you've got the Curry grid, which is toxic, and you've got other grids besides that are positive. That tends to be a geomantic kind of equal-sided grid, so that each square in that grid, it forms the same size. But lays, there's three types of lays. You can have a topographical lay that just links an ancient site to an ancient site to an ancient site. That forms a line, but there isn't any energy flowing in that line. That's a topographical lay. Now, if you get an energy lay, then that is got energy flowing along that lay. You know, it could flow one way or could flow the other way. Then the third type of lay is where ancient man manipulated it, it is said, to align to a particular astronomical event. They're the powerful ones. So, for example, the St. Michael lay that I mentioned earlier is where it used to align to the Beltane, the May the 1st sunrise, and the Samhain, the October the 31st, Halloween sunset. That's an astronomical line. They are the most powerful and the ones that the ancestors sought out the most. And they are very different to a grid system because they target a celestial event. And when it does all come, you know, into synchronicity, where, say, for example, you've got a ley line targeting the summer solstice, for example, on the summer solstice, it's imbued with more power. So the dates, you can work with dates with those types of lays. And unlike particular grid systems, they may or may not be that perfectly aligned.
And what occurs to me is that because I'm like so excited I can barely talk, because you're taking this site and this line and aligning it to a celestial phenomenon or a celestial energy, then yeah, you've anchored in the celestial into the earth and you've just amplified it and expanded it exponentially, correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's what the ancients were doing to the sun and the moon and particular stars. For example, all of those celestial alignments are more commonly associated to major ley lines, not small ley lines, major, what we call major ley lines and ley systems. And that's the ones that have earth currents entwined in them, because the ley isn't necessarily the power in the land, it's the currents that entwine them that are more powerful. That's what the geomancers were doing here, which was rediscovered in the 1980s by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst. And I dowsed with Hamish. Hamish has forwarded my books for one of my books, for example. So we have a lot of wisdom about that. The thing I notice about the American psyche is it's fixated with lays and straight lines, where over here, and in other cultures, you're looking to the meandering earth currents more. Do you see what I mean? We're two different cultures looking at things slightly differently. So I look at a ley system, whereas a lot of my American students look at ley lines. Do you see what I mean? There's a big difference. And to really explore the earth, you need to realize that it's a part of much more than just a linear system.
Right.
I hope that helps.
It does.
Go ahead.
Does one system feed the next? Like were the ancients astute enough to use one system to feed the next? So the cosmic system feeds the earth system, which feeds the topographical ley system. Is that how that works altogether?
Interestingly, sometimes and sometimes not. I wish I could say yes.
Okay.
An overall yes to that system, because it was noticed by a Dowser many years ago now that you could have two female earth currents in the same church and they wouldn't interact with one another. It was almost like one was going there, the Mary current, and then the Ellen current was going over the top of it to avoid it. So not all earth energies interact. If they're of the same ley system, they seem to interact beautifully so, where the male and the female cross is a place in the landscape where we can seek balance and harmony, okay, within our own yin and yang self. But sometimes the systems do interact and sometimes they don't. It's, you know, it can be quite complicated in that regard. But on the most part, if the currents are entwined in a ley, everything interacts in that system.
It is fascinating. Like every time you say things, it's like there's so much more to unpack to each section. Well, you talked about the two different types of water. Go ahead and educate us on that.
Well, again, I got brought up with esoteric water dowsing, which is the kind of spiritual side of water dowsing. Okay, so it's not just about finding a well, for example. And in esoteric water divining law, there are two types of water. One is born by rainfall, of course. It falls from the clouds and the rain, and it fills up the water table, the aquifers, the underground rivers. We know that. That is called groundwater by the water boards worldwide. But in the ancient law, there is a much deeper water than any aquifer like that is born within the earth, because the earth can produce water. And I have predicted over 25 years now that you're going to find water on all rock planets. Okay, because the planet can produce water. And I remember having a kind of debate with a geologist that came on one of my workshops to do with water. And he was saying, I can't see it, I can't see it. But I gave the analogy, but Gaia can produce sulfur, uranium, plutonium, silver. Why exclude water? And now they're finding water 7 miles down, which the Russians went down for, 7 miles down. That's not groundwater, that's yin water, born within the womb of Gaia. And where you have that water, if you imagine the energy pattern can go all the way up to the surface of the earth, and it produces a spiral pattern, yeah, a beautiful spiral pattern called a geospiral. And that's what the ancients were looking for to put their centers of their stone circles or their constructs above, because we've measured it and it comes out within 7 and 10 hertz frequency, matching the Schumann resonance and our alpha brainwaves. It's quite healing. If you find these in the landscape, and they're easy to find, once you have a little bit of Dow's intuition, it's easy to do, and then you can take people there for healing. And it's this water. This water is intensely healing. And what are we made of?
Water.
Exactly.
Yes.
Water.
Exactly.
Yes.
Water. And what does water have in terms of, you know, its properties? According to homeopaths,
Minerals in it, or
Memory,
yes,
information,
yes,
memory.
yes,
memory.
Yeah.
So let's say you go to Stonehenge, and Stonehenge at the near center, never the geometric center, you have this spiral pattern. Then when you go to the center of Stonehenge, or at a kiva at Charco Canyon, the early kiva of Charco Canyon, for example, or the Oracle Room of America's Stonehenge, you can interact with the Akashic record of place. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say you've got underground water in your own home. Yeah. Let's say, I mean, I've got an underground stream going through my house, just for an analogy. Let's say you've got that in your home and you want to really find out about your home. Tap into the Akashic record of place, because that has the memory field, and sensitive people like yourselves, yeah, it's not difficult to be around that water, to communicate with that water, and to find out maybe what happened in the past in that house, you know, and how the house feels about the past. And in a way, we're coming back to what I said at the very beginning, hydromancy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Communing with water in place. So again, there's many different ways that we can work with the energies within our own homes.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of what that would look like, the working with the water, the memory of water in a location? Like, what would be your protocol? Just kind of give us an example of how you would do that so people have a baseline to follow.
Okay, I mean, well, what I say to my students, which I always say, is if it feels right, what I say, go with it. And if it doesn't, put it in the delete bin. You have to go with what your heart leads you to, okay? So I'm going to say how I do it, which may or may not resonate with some people, and that's a good thing. So I always tell the house and the underground water what my intent's going to be. That's the first thing that I do. I tell the place what I'm going to do, because I give the analogy. If I came into your place, Kat, and I go, and you don't know me that well, and I go straight up and I start looking through your bedroom drawers, you're going to go, what's that woman doing in my home? She's crazy. Yeah, I don't like her. She's been intrusive. Then that's what some of the earth energies feel in the houses. Do you see what I mean? If I just go ramming in like, I'm Maria Wheatley, I'm going to change the energies here, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, without telling the property first, then you're going to be up against something. But if you tell the place what you're going to do, in the spirit of place, and maybe the ancestors, etc., you're welcomed with love from the energy of the house. It's a good starting point, I feel. Okay, so that's how I start. I just tell the house what I'm going to do and how I'm going to be working with it. Then I just sit quietly above where I think the water is. Yeah, and if you can't douse, for example, just go to the center of the house or the center of a room. Okay, you're at the esoteric center now, and feel for where it is. Okay, so you don't have to have dowsing at this moment in time. Let's use our sensitivity. Go to the esoteric center, tell the house what you're going to do, and sense, and just stand with your feet slightly apart, and just use your body as a dowsing rod. And if it goes slightly to that side, oh, it could be over there. Forward, backward, to one side. Use your body as an antenna, yeah, to the energy, and flow with that, and then kind of just face the water and have those quiet moments and tap in and ask to be attuned to or shown the past, or to just communicate. I always say that a good thing to do with water when you first work with water is introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Maria, because water has memory, and it's a global connection with water molecules. So the first time you introduce yourself to water, it's like introducing yourself to the world's waters, the world's oceans, for example. And you can make it into a beautiful thing. You can light candles, incense, I mean, you're all very, I know that you're all very aware people that, that would be able to do that. So do you need dowsing to tune into the house? I would say, no, you can use your own body.
Yeah, this is so my wheelhouse. This is already where I am. Like, I can feel the energies in that way. But I have a question for you. I know of so many spiritual people who are so drawn to water and so drawn to like coastal areas. And that's where I'm headed. Like in my move, I'm moving to a coastal area. I'm so drawn to water in that way. And hearing you speak, it occurred to me in hearing you speak just now and listening to a prior interview, that maybe the reason people are so drawn to water is because there's that communion between the frequency of the individual themselves with the earth energies. And there's a balancing, there's an exchange happening between those of us who are so high vibrational. There's an exchange that's occurring that will eventually shift the earth itself. Right? As more and more people are in tune with the water and communing with the water in that way, there's this exchange that's happening that's shifting everything itself. It's a cooperative thing that we're doing with the earth herself in this exchange that we're having with the waters, with the concept of memory and data and information that's held within water itself, all those things. Yeah.
And did you say you were moving to the coast?
Yes, I am.
Oh, how lovely. Well, in terms of geomancy, then, you see, where you have two elements meet. So, for example, you've got water meeting earth at a coastline, haven't you? Now, if you imagine a church that's got a spire or a tower going up, that's where earth meets air. Wherever you have that, it's called an interface, and that generates positive energy. That's why people just feel better for walking along the coast, you know. And so but if we tune into those interfaces of that energy, then you'll buy a powerhouse, really, because you're working with the element of earth and water, which are the feminine elements. And how wonderful.
Nice, very nice.
Miss Linda, did you want to hop in?
It just resonates because I moved to the coast as well. And within a 4-year period, this little town has been bombarded with people who are healers moving to it. And we all had the same, supposed to be here, this is home, this is it. So I find that fascinating that within this period of time, so many people have just instinctually gathered here. One of the questions that I have is, when I moved here, my curiosity was, piqued of why are we all coming to this spot? So I started trying to find maps of the various lines. And I really didn't know what sources to trust, what sources not to, and so I was curious if you have books that talk about lines that have maps, or if they're ones that you consider good resources for vortexes and maps of ley lines, grids, things like that, where people have a place to start when they're curious.
Well, I suppose if we look to the person who coined the phrase ley line, or ley, in England we call it a ley because ley means line. So if you say ley line, you're saying like line. And if you went to the Ley Hunters Moot, run by a lovely chap, and you said ley line, like this, so we say ley. But if we return to Alfred Watkins, who wrote the first book on leys, okay, in the 1930s, he rediscovered the ley system. Then what he said is you do what's called your own ley hunting, which is what people do. They don't necessarily turn to books. There's no definitive book about any of this. There will never be, because it will be too exhaustive to write a global book about that. But one thing that you can do is look for lines in the same manner as Alfred Watkins did. And what he said, if you have 5 or more ancient sites, and I know America has had a lot destroyed, but if you look for things like springs, high peak tops, even the ancients in America, the Anasazi, they were looking for these topographical features and making niches in them, just like in Wales and England, they make a niche in the mountain because that's where the line's going. So look for things like springs, and you look for, topographical features. And if you have 5 or more in a line, and that line can be quite, miles long, then you have a ley. So you can find your own leys within your vicinity, rather than relying on somebody else. And if there's stories associated with First Nation, well, that's probably going to be sacred space anyway, so you can start to literally join the dots and find your own ley systems there. I mean, that would be one way of starting to work with the energy. And one of my American students that did this, I'm not going to mention names, obviously it's data protection in the UK, but her journey was quite, she was saying, oh, there's nothing in my area. Yeah, and I went, well, give it a go. And next minute, she was sending me these extraordinary photographs of this house in the middle of a wood that had 2 massive sphinxes by it, and she said she stumbled on this really big house. It was in the middle of nowhere, and the next minute she found a spring. And so we can find it. And in the lands that have been documented in the antiquarian times in America, you can look back and have a look at those as well, like all over Ohio. It was documented in the 18th and 19th centuries by 2 people that were looking at all the ancient sites, and you could use one of those and just draw a big line down. There's ancient sites in Wisconsin, and I sometimes pronounce that incorrectly. Forgive me if I have. And again, we can use these ancient sites and draw things from there, or start from a spring. So find your own lines and start to walk your own lays as well.
Is there a reason why, like in Linda's situation, that like did the earth call to her? Like when people are compelled to go someplace, do you know what that energy communication is about?
Well, I'm sure we all do in our hearts. It's the call from, you know, as in Druidry, we say from heart to heart, the heart of place to your heart, and you go heart in heart, heart in heart, and hand in hand. It's a kind of Druid thing. So yeah, the land obviously calls, and how wonderful to have all of those people come and create a community. I mean, that's such a wonderful thing that's occurring for you and everybody that lives there.
It really is. The locals don't quite know what to do with us because it's a very conservative community.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's funny.
It's really interesting though that there's pockets, you know, and we just happen to be one of the newer pockets that has just quickly emerged here. And when we talk about it, it was like we came here and it was like, I don't care what has to happen. This is where I'm supposed to be.
Wow.
And there was just no question about it. And so I love that I think there is this coming together. And for me, I think each one of us is part of a grid in ourselves. Like Angela says, we are part of that grid.
There has to be some level of electromagnetic resonance, right? There's that at play, right? That magnetism, that draw to that particular place as well.
Nancy's got a question from our live stream. I'm not sure what this means, I don't know this term, but she says, where Earth meets air, it seems like liminal space. Is that accurate? I don't know what liminal space is. Does that make sense?
Liminal is between two things almost, you know, a liminal space. Exactly, yes, it's a liminal space where the veil, we say, is thinner there. So wherever you have an interface or a liminal space, then the veil is thin, naturally thin there. So again, you're going to find your own kind of psychic powers or sensitivity heightened at these places, and those that meditate on the coast, they say that they can easily get into a meditative space. I don't know, I'm sure that you guys have experienced that. So yeah, we can work with these liminal spaces and interfaces.
All right. And then I'm going to kind of go back into some terms here just for people, for everyone's edification. What's the difference between Neolithic and Megalithic?
That's a good question. Lithic is Greek for stone. So megalithic, mega means big, lithic means stone. It literally means big stone, standing stone. Yeah. Megalithic, it means a standing stone that, you know, ancient man put up, a big stone. And when we come to Neolithic, that's a time span in the British Isles that goes from around about 4000 BC to 2500 BC. Roughly 5,500 years ago was the Neolithic, which means neo, new, lithic, new Stonehenge. So that's what Neolithic means. It's a kind of time in the British Isles when they were first monumentalizing the landscape.
Okay. And then megalithic came before that, like that was, I mean, my understanding, forgive me if this is childlike, but my understanding the megalithics would be there before the last flood, and they're what's left from the last great flood. Is that accurate?
Some may be, but some would definitely put up, you know, maybe about 8,000 years ago, like it's Stonehenge. And then after that, because you've got different times of different megalithic building construction,
Okay.
there's a really good dating system that a lot of archaeologists in the UK use now, and that's luminosity testing, because carbon-14 has got its flaws. Yeah. But if you imagine you've got the old surface level, we've put a stone into the ground, and that's the old surface level. Okay, and they put in a probe and check when the last time daylight hit that old surface level. Yeah, and that's how they're dating some of the ancient sites here. So some were from before the flood, but a lot came after in the Neolithic, and then after that in the Bronze Age, then after that in the Iron Age, and then you've got the medieval time of the Masonic medieval church building program, and in between that you've got the Templars. So you've got like layer after layer of era after era adding to the ley system and the earth currents and tapping into that. So it started by one culture, but then was used by many more as time ripples on, and us today.
Angela, go ahead.
Yeah, I do. What is it about the stones that were chosen for Stonehenge? Like, what is it about their makeup, their ability to amplify the energies, the frequency? Is that the reason these particular stones were chosen? And then how does that correlate to our use of crystals? Like when we use crystals to amplify the energies that we specifically work with?
That's great, and you're just so at Stonehenge. It's almost like you've been there. It's amazing. Your question, I love it, because yes, the blue stones were especially chosen and brought from Wales, 170 miles away, because they're 3 times more magnetic than any other stone in the British Isles. Okay, so you just went there with that.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's why I was
Awesome.
smiling away. Perfect. So yes, and that will amplify anything 3 times greater than the other stones. But the other reason why the largest, the blue stones at Stonehenge are the smaller ones, they're human height, okay? And the really big ones are called sarsen stone, and they're the gigantic ones that are more godlike. Now, they were chosen, and they'd never seen the light of day before, because where they were quarried, which is not far from where I am now in my home actually, they were taken out of the ground, so they'd never seen the light of day. Yeah, and then they were raised because they were easier to work into shape, because they didn't have a crust. If sarsen stone is exposed to daylight, it has a crust. So here we are, we've got the blue stones of Wales that are amplified, just like you said, like a crystal. And now you've got the towering stones that are literally born for Stonehenge and Stonehenge alone. And you're right, crystals and stones, there's not really much difference, which I know that there's kind of, we know, because they have this crystal lattice structure. And my father came up with an amazing saying that, you know, you may or may not like. He said you have a semiconductor coming out of Silicon Valley, and it has properties to, you know, record information and, you know, move information on, and that has a lattice structure that is hardly any different from a standing stone. So he would call them a macro chip, the megalith, the macro chip. And so they are very similar. So you're right, we can use them like crystals, but also like semiconductor, like they're on a circuit board. And the great thing about megaliths in a stone circle is they talk, literally, they put a beam of energy. I'll describe this later or next time how they do it, but just for the moment, because I want to answer your question, because it was so exciting when you said that. It throws a beam of light to the next stone, and which throws a beam of light to the next stone. So all of the stones are communicating. Is called crosstalk. If you want to get posh in dowsing terms, it's called crosstalk. But could you imagine now that you can't see that, but if you stood just by a stone, you're getting the crystal energy of that stone beamed out at you. That is what people feel, and that's the game changer when you go to a stone circle.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I visited a crystal shop. I thought this was kind of funny because I feel energy already, right? Went in this crystal shop, and for whatever reason, I was drawn to these hematite rings. So I purchased two, and I've been using them ever since. But when I move the energy, when I meditate, when I'm in that heart-centered space, I'm moving the energy, and I feel it even more with these hematite rings. How does that play? Because I know hematite is very magnetic. So it seems like it's just amplifying what's already present within myself.
You know, you're such a great bunch to speak to. You ask these questions, and I feel alive answering them. I really do, because what is the one thing that is found around Stonehenge and Avebury is hematite.
Nice.
So,
Boom, Angela.
so they were using the two, I think, together. Do you see what I mean? To work with the energies, just like you say, you can feel it move, because it's kind of dense in a way, isn't it? Hematite. And whenever I lead guests to tours to Avebury, Stonehenge, and West Kennet Longbar, I always find them hematite. And the great thing about it is, in its natural form, okay, if you get a sharp object, you know, like a compass point or a penknife or something like that, and say that's the hematite, I'll do it live for you next time, okay? and you get that hematite like that, and if it's golden hematite and you go like this, you get the most beautiful gold powder, okay, which is highly magnetic. So if you use that powder even on yourself or on megaliths, because they found little paint pots in Orkney, so they could have been, you know, putting symbols onto standing stones, I suggest strongly that the two were going together. So you get red hematite, you get a brown form, and you get golden. So they can be extracted, and they have medicinal properties just with powder. You know, it's a wonderful substance. So no wonder you were drawn to it. Our ancestors, your ancestors, mine, they were drawn to that in the Stonehenge and Avebury environs.
Awesome.
So let's dive deeper into Stonehenge, and because we have one more hour with you, or less than an hour with you, and I really want to make sure that we kind of cover the core elements. Like, so if you tell us about myths and misinformation versus the reality of what the standing stones are, and kind of break that down for people, because this information is just ladled everywhere to, you know, as a co-opting of history. So if you'd maybe break that down for us, so we have a little bit of a terrain around that.
Well, Stonehenge, you know, when we look at it, it's iconic. Everybody knows what Stonehenge looks like, but every monument had different phases. So Stonehenge had phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4, like Avebury and other sites did. So phase 1 of Stonehenge didn't look like the Stonehenge we're familiar with, for example. So to get to the Stonehenge that we're all so familiar with, that's what's called around 2500 BC, Orthodox dating. I think it's a lot older than that. And there is proof for that. So Stonehenge started as a beautiful white henge bank. You know, like the pyramids were finished off with limestone to make them look that gorgeous white. So were the monuments in the British Isles, because where I live and where Stonehenge is, you've only got that much soil. Beneath that is solid white chalk bedrock. Okay, so they carved out of the landscape these beautiful round henges, which is a bank, yeah, with a ditch on the inside. So it was a white circle. So imagine a beautiful white circle, and inside that white circle, phase 1 of Stonehenge, 56 blue stones going around. That's phase 1, perfectly aligned to the moon. But when I say blue stones, they come from Wales, and they're beautiful because they were highly polished. You're looking at Stonehenge after 1,000 years of, let's face it, British weather, yeah, of rain and gales, and goodness knows what, storms. So originally they were highly polished to look like the Star-Spangled Sky, because bluestone has flecks of white feldspar in it, and so it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful, polished bluestone. So we need to kind of think what it looked like. And again, for our next session, I'll show you polished bluestone, because whenever I take people to Stonehenge, I say, this is what it originally looked like. This is polished bluestone. You're seeing erosion. Yeah. So there are many different phases to Stonehenge, but here's the thing, that the bluestones were always said to have healing virtue and healing power. In the 12th century, Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote a book called The History of the Kings of Britain. It's really, really famous book if you're a Brit. And in that, he said that the stones of Stonehenge, all of them had healing virtue. So we're looking at a healing temple, for example, and even archaeologists such as Tim DeVille and Geoffrey Wainwright, at last, they're coming round to say it was a healing temple. So, you know, in one guise, these are healing places that we can go to, and people used to queue up at Stonehenge to get the healing energy from particular stones called the trilithons. They're the big ones on the inside. And nowadays you can't even touch the stones. I mean, you're banned by Historic England, English Heritage, from even touching the stones on private access, because if I took you there and you touched them, any of you guys here, and probably most of your listeners, you'd get a download, and you get healing. Ooh, can't have that. You know, say the authorities. So you know, these places want to exchange their information with us from the stars, from the earth. They want that. Yes. So, you know, it's a way in which you were saying about dumbing down the American people, Kat. You were Catman. You said that earlier, and I thought they're trying to dumb people down. They go into Stonehenge because, one, there was one stone that is very defaced. It's got a piece of concrete in it, and that's where the security will take you into Stonehenge. But if you walked in the way your ancient ancestors did, flown it through the entrance, the proper entrance on the earth energies, bang, is suddenly in perfect harmony with Stonehenge. And do you know what? It's a sunwise monument. It has lunar alignments and solar alignments to the midsummer sunrise, for example, is near on. And yet that's the sun goes clockwise round, doesn't it? It's a clockwise motion of going round, but security takes you anti-clockwise round the monument in the general public. So you're going against the soul of Stonehenge. And lots of us have complained to English Heritage, you know, about that. But that's just one example of, you know, being dumbed down because these sites want to communicate with us.
And what are some of the misinformation that they've said Stonehenge is versus what you've discovered in the Neolithic people that it's connected to, the long-headed, the elongated-headed people?
Yes, I mean, I discovered the elongated skulled people in 2015 because I just turned dowsing on its head, and as you mentioned, Linda, that you're doing pendulum dowsing. Well, quite often in pendulum dowsing, you ask the pendulum something and you get a yes or no answer. Simply put, isn't it? You get that. And what I decided to do was not to do that sort of pendulum dowsing, but to get a map of Stonehenge and simply ask the ancestors, what do you want me to find? And I'll just do that. And without anyway, I just got drawn to a particular barrow, a long barrow. It was the largest in Northwest Europe. And I just thought, I've got to find out who was in this barrow. And normally in long barrows that are Neolithic, 5,500 years old, they're communal. But we get buried separately today, don't we? I have my grave and my headstone or whatever. In the Neolithic, people were buried together as a community. Yeah, so it's called communal burial. So I thought, wow, the biggest long barrow next to Stonehenge, I'm going to find hundreds of people in this. But I didn't. I found one person, and that was unprecedented in that time. And it was a woman. And so I researched and researched, and eventually found her skull at Cambridge University, and it was long skulled. It's undeniable. I've got photographs of it, measurements, you know, of these people. So they had long skulls, and maybe you will resonate with this because I'm a druid and I can have rats, you know, we can all rant, can't we? And I was in Cambridge University with a curator, with a photographer that I'd brought with me. And I just was ranting, give me a couple of minutes alone with this woman, this skull. And the curator left as I was like asking for some space alone. And I put my hand over the skull, near the skull's throat chakra, and just said, whatever your story is, I will tell it. And then I moved it up to the third eye, as it were, and said, give me the vision to see what had happened. And then as I moved it over her long skull, like it's like this, if you see what I mean, then there was like 2 pulse points, as if she had 2 crown chakras. And I've often said that about the Neolithic people with the long skulls. I think their chakra system was different to our own.
And
I gotta put this in here.
Okay.
But yeah, Matthias De Stefano, he speaks about this, about the Syrians, the people from Syria who came, and they had that type of skull structure because they communicated via telepathy more than they used the mouth. So it was intentional. It was intentional in that way. They had another access point where that allowed them to speak telepathically in that way. So that kind of correlates, that corresponds, yeah.
I'm in total agreement with that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify, this is a clarification point, because there are people who are like, well, yeah, long skulls, people bound their heads together and they created long skulls, but this is not that, because the thickness of the skull and the design of the skull does not match human skulls. Yes, you have humans who elongated their skulls and wrapped them, but it's still, the sutures are the same as a round-headed person and whatnot. But these the sutures are different, and the thickness is different, the density is different. If you want to speak to that, Maria.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, Brian Forster's done an awful lot of work on the long skulled, elongated skulls of Paracas in Peru. And I think that Brian really got the money shot, as we say, when he discovered an elongated skulled fetus. Okay, so now if you've got a fetus that has a clear and elongated skull, then that is natural. You know, that's not any head binding when the child is being given birth to, you know, when the skull is pliable, although I'm sure they were replicating those elongated people at some point. But the long-headed or the, you know, cone heads of Paracas, they are natural. It's just that some people after that replicated what they were looking like, because they were associated with powers, they were associated with royalty, for example. And it's interesting about the point that you were saying about the telepathy, you know, because what I took some measurements, and again I'll go into this later on or next session. I took some measurements of the stones that were emitting signals in Hertzian frequency. Okay, I was with a team, and I wanted to know if particular areas that were dowsable had a signal, and they did. And it was 18 hertz. And, you know, the team said, well, you know, wow. And I'm going, well, what's wow? And they said, well, we hear at 20. And then suddenly I had that moment, elongated skulls. What if they heard Yeah. And so their perception may not have been my perception when I go there is feeling like it would be for you guys. You'd feel the energies and then you'd see it. But I think the elongated skulled people could hear the megalithic energy being emitted
Yes.
by the stones, the song lines of the Australian peoples, to quote their wisdom.
That's just fascinating. And I'm wondering, because you've said that, you know, the elongated head skulled people, I'm wondering where they went to from what your research shows, and how are they woven into history?
They were woven out of history.
Woven out of history, okay.
They were woven out of history. You know what, when I went to Cambridge in 2015 or 2016, I think it was 2015, I was flabbergasted because, you know, I'm at Cambridge and it'll all say posh Cambridge. It's very, very elitist. And so I thought I'd have this mega, you know, amazing system where you could, you know, look to who looked at it last on a computer database. And I don't know if in the States you can remember, in my childhood, if you got a library book, you had a little card that had the date of the last person and the date that you had to take it back. That was their system. And on that kind of old system, it hadn't been seen since the 1930s. Now, imagine that you're in a warehouse about 20 feet tall with row after row up, and all it has was Stonehenge with the female symbol, you know, like Venus or Mars depicting their gender, and then Abydos from Egypt, the opposite side, not being seen since the 1930s in all potential. I don't think they know what they've got in those boxes, because they don't have, to be fair, some of them don't have the time. You have to have a project. They've got loads of other things. They're constantly trying to generate, you know, money. So I think there could be lots more to be discovered, and we're on the brink of something big. We haven't discovered it. You hear about all of these authors saying they discovered this. We're on the brink of what ancient civilizations were. We're not at the forefront.
So when you say we're on the brink, why do you say we're on the brink of discovering?
Because I think there's so much yet to be discovered. Yeah, I think, you know, what the main authors as well, and you know, I'm saying myself in this, I'm not excluding myself. I'd be the first to say, I think we've only just touched on ancient civilizations, because we tend to say the same story all of the time, and I do. Like, you know, Atlantis and this, and it's a progression, but I think there's so much in between that is going to be found. England was only an island 6,000 years ago. Theoretically, you could have walked from England's south coast to Norway across Doggerland. It wasn't a sea, and they're dredging up all sorts of stuff from Doggerland. So I think Atlantis is a part of a long lost multi-continent gone, and that we're on the brink of rediscovering even things on England's doorstep, potentially.
God, that's exciting. And what, from your research and intuition and your wisdom, what do you understand what happened to the elongated skulled people? Because, you know, they had this wisdom, they had this power, but then they seemed to vanish. Or did they die out over years? Or what's your understanding, Maria?
It's a sad story in a way, because once I discovered what I call the Neolithic High Queen or High Priestess, in times past, the two were the same in the British Isles. So you could be a high priest and a king. I thought I'd look into every other long barrow, and there are about 80 that surround Stonehenge, and so I looked at all of those antiquarian reports and read them all, and it seemed that there's a story emerged where she had been murdered, that queen, and a lot of the elongated people had been, sadly, around her in that part of the Stonehenge environs, had been killed purposely. You know that because if you've got a wound to your head and there's no signs of healing, That's what you died of. I mean, that's what anthropologists look for. And so I think there was at around about 2500 BC, again, Orthodox dating, that there must have been some kind of fight for Stonehenge, their spiritual capital, by what's called the beaker culture, were coming over from Europe at that time, or possibly many, many centuries, and if not millennia before, and they were much taller, really, really tall, and they were described as being robust, tall, stout men. It's what antiquarians who dug into them, and they were quite giant-like as well, much, much taller than the ancient Britons. And it seems at that point they were taking over the lands of Stonehenge and changed the death rites. They went from long barrows to round barrows, for example. A different culture came in, and the ancient DNA studies done, is called ADNA. Ancient DNA studies have shown that by 2480 BC, that's only a couple of centuries after the very, very tall giant-like people came here, all of 98% of the ancient British DNA had been eradicated. That's the DNA study. So that shows that these people, I mean, I don't think it was just war that killed them off. I mean, a bit like the Spanish that went to Peru. What did they bring with them? Terrible English like diseases. And if you haven't got the immunity against cold, smallpox, or whatever it is, you're susceptible. So a part of it could have been disease, for example, and what the DNA studies have shown is that there was 500 years when these two cultures did not intermarry. They were separate for whatever reasons. Could have been cultural dislike of one another, or it could have been because it wasn't seen natural in which to do so. Who knows? But they were separated for 500 years. Then there was a tipping point, as Dr. Selena Brace describes, and they started intermarrying. So gradually the skull, the natural long skulls, were changed into the middle shape skull and the round skull. So there was a kind of hybrid human of these two species, if indeed they are, or that they are not human, that then developed. So there's been a lot of really interesting, very advanced DNA studies coming out of various universities and independent studies.
And these giant people, they're not the red-haired giants that people talk about that are just brutal. Are those the same giants, or it's a different species?
I think it is probably a different species over here. We call them the beaker culture because they brought over with them from Europe a particular type of style of pot that they were buried with. They're called beakers, but they're actually pots, very, really nice pottery. And the pottery changed from beaker, from Peterborough ware, which was what the Neolithic used, to what's called the beaker. But this is the thing. You see, with the beaker culture, it was very male dominated, and before the beaker culture came here, it was lunar and led by women. You know, you had a lot of lunar alignments at places, and then it all changed with solar and a masculine led society. Before that, it was a female led society, a goddess worshipping peoples. So that changed in the psyche of everyone. And then the land changed. The Neolithic were communal. They'd say, this is our land. This is ours. Stonehenge is ours. The beaker came along and said, oh, that's mine. I'm the king of here. That's not yours now. So they did land division for the first time and divided England up into kingships. Do you see what I mean? So it really did change from a society that was communal based to the ego. This is mine. And that's what the English people inherited, land division. Yeah. And this is mine. And we still do to a certain regard.
Oh yeah, and it came over to America, and stealing land from the indigenous people for trading beads for land and just completely cutting everything up. Did you want to say something, Angela? I saw you were off mute.
Yeah, I kind of got lost in the discussion.
Oh.
I
You'll
got,
come
I got a
back.
question. I have a bit of a tangent question though at this point. I'm curious to know if you have any insight into Stonehenge being a potential portal, like these sacred sites being having portal capabilities.
Absolutely, because again, even if we go back to legends, you know, which I think of the holy history, and Dolores Cannon always said there's a whole load of holy history, you know, out there through her past life regression as well, added a lot. She was very accurate, Dolores. I miss her greatly. But you're right, even in legends, these are places where the veil is thin. Yeah, places where you can interact with ancestors, with timelines, with movement, with flow. So yes, with the right conditions, I definitely think that if they were pristine, you see, unfortunately Stonehenge isn't pristine. It's ruinous now, you know. But could you imagine if we all decided as a world global culture that we would turn one ancient monument back into its pristine condition in the same way as our ancient ancestors built it, so like no concrete, you don't need that, but we did that, and then it's activated. Yeah, then I think you've got a workable, beautiful way of activating the portal. That they're still active, don't get me wrong, they're still active. There are times when you really do feel energy really massive, like waves at Stonehenge, but where it's in a ruinous state, I think it kind of isn't as grandiose as what it previously was.
Yeah.
Did you have something, Linda?
I was just picturing someone doing that now, creating new
ones
versions of that. Yeah.
And I think,
I mean, beautiful.
And I think, you know, like what you're saying is that we can do many versions of that in our own space. You know, there's no reason to not initiate that now. I mean, start small, grow big, you know, once you've mastered it. And like, imagine if, you know, Angela and Linda and I and Jason, our other co-hosts that we alternate with, if we all did something like that, we had like little monuments and we were like, we're going to intentionally send energy to each other and these 4 different points, you know, like what can we create within that? Because, and again, I'd want to be very mindful because, you know, not just stomp in and be like, I know how to do this. And like you create something and accidentally blow something up or mummify yourself, like you talked in one of your talks where somebody working with green energy, negative green energy, accidentally mummified themselves because they didn't do something properly. Well, that'll probably be next week when we talk about that. But let's talk about that in terms of these sites and how metal breaks energy in a broken circle versus intact circles, because there are still intact circles that people can go to and they can access. And I was wondering if you could maybe share about those circles that you know of, and then how metal impacts that, for better or for worse.
Yeah, just before I do, I would like to say that, you know, I live in a kind of large county. It's quite a rural county that contains Stonehenge and Avebury and some very powerful lays. And a very powerful lay goes from Stonehenge to Avebury, and a very well-known moneyed banker family owns that land. And they have put a pyramid on it. So you know, if they tap into it, we can tap into it. So, you know, again, by finding lays yourself independently and tapping into that with good intent, you know, you can really change a lot. You know, so again, we can think about co-creating new things on lay systems and take the power back. Yeah. To us and to our families and to those that we love, and to leave those for our children like the ancestors did. But yes, there are many, you know, ancient sites that are intact that, you know, we can go to. I mean, my personal favorite of an intact circle is in what's called the Lake District. in England, and it's very beautiful. And out of the 60 stones that made it, 55 are still there. That is really near enough intact. And when I take people there, it's called Swinside Stone Circle in Cumbria. For those that like to tap into things energetically speaking, you get a photo on Google. And when I take people in there, we go into the proper entrance. You know, all stone circles have an entrance, you know, and I say, you start to feel the heat now. They kind of, you know, some of them going, really? Yes. Put your hands out when enter, you know, either side, and then the heat is intense because you're now going vroom, vroom, vroom. Circular energy is going round and round and round. It's like perpetual motion, yeah, and that generates a lot of energy and heat. And so they kind of do it, half expecting not to feel anything, because you can sometimes you get the eyes in the air look, you know. And then the next minute they go, oh my God, I felt that. Can I do it again? You know, it's like little route or route, as you guys say, you know, going round and round. And that is the kind of energy that you can feel from stone circles. And you have what's called an exit gate at a stone circle as well. Now, if you imagine most stones in a stone circle all face the same way nicely, yeah, like that. Well, we've seen pictures, but always, or in all probability, you get one that's offset. So instead of being like that, you've got one at an angle. Do you see what I mean? Now, the energy is going zoom, zoom, but then exiting, vroom, vroom, through the exit gate. Now you want something to shift in your life, whether it's an old emotional worn out, you know, pattern that we all have them, or memory of the past, or you just want something shifted, boom, that will help you if you've got your intent, boom, to shift it pretty quickly. So they can be absolutely incredible places to work with the energies, and they will astound you. They really will. They still astound me, and I've been to them so many times. But every now and again, when you see how people react to the energies, it really is so heartwarming.
And then you had talked about how metal can impact a site, and also I'd made a note while I was doing this, so I don't quite exactly remember the moment, but you talked about energy grids being infected with man-made symbols, and I'm wondering if that's the metal aspect. Does that ring?
Metal to do with in the Iron Age, where it was the height of Druid power. So you've gone through the stone circle phase, and now you're in what's called the Iron Age of the Celtic Druids. And they had, you know, their teachings that Caesar, who was a Roman who invaded England, started recording what the Druids were saying. From his perspective, he'd call them barbarians. We weren't barbarians, but that was from his perspective. But he did record certain things, like you shouldn't take metal into a stone circle, because the Fae and the Fae in Celtic legend aren't necessarily small like Tinkerbell. They're quite tall, the Fae. And they can be worked for or against you as well. They can be indifferent. Do you see what I mean? They can be beneficial and sometimes mischievous as well. But the Fae don't like metal. Metal will keep them away. So it was a kind of old legend where you wouldn't take iron into stone circles because you'd offend the Fae, and you don't want to offend the elementals. You don't want to offend you seriously don't want to offend the Fae. So that's one reason where we tend not to take in iron. It's iron that they detested, according to our very old legends.
Okay. And I'm wondering if that was metal that has been brought in with the intention of breaking that energy and keeping that the magic Fae people away.
Well, yes. I mean, intent is everything.
Yeah.
It really is. And in Ireland, you know, I love the way the Irish tell their stories and their holy history, because they don't call them lays or ley lines. They call them fairy lines. That's the lays in Ireland, the fairy lines, and it just conjures up this kind of mythological fairy tales. And so up until relatively recent times, just like the ancient Chinese said, you cannot break Long May, you can't amputate Long May. Well, the Irish would say, oh, you can't go across a fairy line. And some chap in Ireland did go across a fairy line, and the wall kept falling down because they said the Fae were getting really, you know, angry at this, and so they would try to destroy the house. And the Fae are said in Southern Ireland, in Sligo, in Ireland rather than the Republic of Ireland, in Sligo, to come out of a portal recorded by Yeats, the poet Yeats, on a mountain called Ben Bulben. And there was this portal, and the Fae would come out of the portal and travel down the fairy lines, which had ancient sites on them, and they would put mounds, they called them Shi, their burial mounds. But the thing is that the Fae take you into the burial mound. You might think you're in there with the day, with the Fae, but you come out and it's 10 years hence. So we're talking portals, timelines with the Fae. Do you see what I mean? So when we have a look at the ancient island mythology, they're talking about portals, timelines, a mythological or extraterrestrial race that is still active, and that can, you know, change you by taking you into the mounds. Yeah. So it's a wonderful, wonderful place to visit, Ireland.
Yeah, you make me want to go to England so bad. I've always been drawn to England. I've always been drawn to England. I'm a bit of a Britophile. This just kind of, it really is cementing it for me. I have a couple more questions, but Angela, I see you came off mute.
Yeah, I just think it's so fascinating how many parallels there are between the human system and the Earth system itself. And I feel like as we get well acquainted with the self, there's an automatic, it's like you're drawn into knowing how to interact with the earth once you get well acquainted with the self. Because Kat, you asked a question, well, how do you know how to set up your stones, and how do you know how to work with the earth energies? And I think it's this draw, it's this knowing. It's like that draw I had when I walked in the crystal shop and I was led to the hematite rings. It's like this knowing you're automatically led to, and if you're just open, you just kind of allow yourself to be expanded in that regard, and you'll just have that knowing of what to do. There won't be a question of what do I need to do. You'll just know what needs to be done and do it.
I guess that probably,
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, no, just to add to that, and that was, you know, what the ancestors were doing. They were looking for these amazingly powerful energies, and, you know, just like acupuncture, placing the stones, you know, on into those energies that have been active now for thousands and thousands of years. So if we take responsibility, spiritual responsibility for ourselves, if you will, and think, you know, what can I create? And if I create something really beautiful, whether it's I do a standing stone. I've got a standing stone in my garden that I've put up. But, you know, whatever it is, whether it's the grid lines you want to make or something, let's think of it. This is our spiritual legacy for our children's 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 children, just like the ancestors, because we can create beauty. And we can create love, and that's what I think is the real truth of the landscape. It's love and beauty.
That's gorgeous. One of the things you had said was, you know, there are, and I didn't know this, that there are actually satellites now that are working to combat global warming and climate change, and those extreme changes we're now unavoidably in. And you said, you know, we can do this with working with the earth energy. We can do this by working with the grids. And I was wondering if you'd expand on that, because it's such a powerful statement. of taking back, of working with the weather, as opposed to man's like, ugh, I mean, it's just the whole thing of I'll control it. I'll make something horrible, then I'll try to control it, you know? And I'm just wondering what your understanding of how that works is.
Yeah, I mean, because you can have all the harps in the world, but you're
Right.
manipulating, yeah. When you see at the end of the Bronze Age of the megalithic building program, there was climate change. Our ancestors went through a climate change that is in the record of trees and peat bogs and things like that. But they rebooted up the Earth energy system. By that I mean they changed how they did their buildings on the earth. They changed their monuments, but they looked to particular types of energies to reboot that system back up by adding to existing monuments as well. So my point about working with the earth is literally we need to befriend her again, or some of us do. We need to befriend the earth again and ask to be working with her rather than against her. And by, again, tapping into some very easy to find earth energies, because this is a fact. In that era, so just imagine you've gone through climate change, and now things are calming down a little bit, but it's still kind of chaotic, and we're around 1500 BC. Yeah, we could just add a little timeline, orthodox dating. Then they looked to where they should be growing food, for instance, and in the 1950s was the advent of fertilizers, nitrogen based. So before 1950, you didn't have any fertilizers. You used natural fertilizers. But the yields in the 1950s with the fertilizers could not beat the yield per acre in the Iron Age. Yeah, and we still finding it difficult, even with all Monsanto's Roundup and ghastly things like that. We haven't actually beat their yields, yeah, which were working in complete harmony with Gaia. And then the climate seemed to settle down. And so the more that you go against something, it's like if I'm constantly arguing with you guys, you're going to think, oh, it's hard work. I'm going to back off from you. I'm going to back off, and I'm going to back off. But if I'm cooperating with you and we're working together, then you start to be hand in hand and heart in heart. And I think that's what we need to do. Go back to how they were working the land. And being more harmonically attuned to it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's just finding simple energies in the land. It's not difficult.
It's asking questions like, how can I do this? What's the best way? And it's being a participant as opposed to the director. You're co-creating solutions with Gaia, who already has all the wisdom you could ever need. She's just waiting for someone to listen to her.
Yeah, and if you have a piece of land, let's say you've got a field and you want to grow, I don't know, wheat or onions or whatever it is your harvest is going to be. If you just look for particular energy currents in the land, and you would be planting in harmony with that. That's the key, I think, to humanity survival. People say, we got to save the earth. No, we don't. We have to save us. The earth we live for time and time and time again. It's not about the earth. It's about us.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think when people say, oh, you've got to save the earth, Gaia can look after herself. It's us and the silly people to a certain regard. But my belief is, by just working with these energies and with people like yourself that have the right intent and the wanting to, grow in communities, like Linda was talking about, her community that is just coming together. There is so much hope to be had. and we can then put our energy out to people that are unawake yet and wake them up to it. So I have a lot of hope in my art that we can move things forward quite quickly. And I've taught quite a few architects now how to look for these energies, how to decode the land before. They're building projects. I'm never going to be a building project. I'm not an architect, but if you can kind of inspire and impart a little bit of information that's easy to follow, then you have a recipe that is going to be an amazing future for our descendants.
Nice. Angela, do you have anything before I get to our last two questions from our audience?
I don't believe I do. It's such fascinating stuff. It's like
I know.
right in my wheelhouse. I'm so excited.
Oh, you're very kind and very gracious, all of you.
Oh no, it's fantastic. I'm like, I feel like I need to make this a study now, because I feel like it's so elemental, pun intended, but it's so elemental to our, functioning on the planet. It's like, God, you need to know this.
Right.
Like, I don't know what the energy grids are in my house. I don't know if I'm toxifying myself. Like, I need to know it. So we've got Nancy.
Next session, I'm sorry, before you ask the questions,
No.
I'm very aware that we need to do that. But next session, I'll give you some really easy ways to do things. I'll do it live. I'll have a dowsing rod. I'll show you how easy some things are. Yeah, because if you go on YouTube and you try to find something, I've been dowsing for, as you know, most of my life, and I listened to one tutorial and thought, I can't even follow that. Why make it so complicated? It might make you sound very intelligent, but there's such easy ways of doing things, and we're empower one another by doing that.
Beautiful. All right. So Nancy asks, where are the US stone circles?
Yeah, Nancy, yes, there are a lot of stone structures in the United States. One of my favorites is run by a lovely chap and family called, appropriately, Dennis Stone. And it's called America's Stonehenge, that's near Salem, where the witch trials were, about 30 minutes from Boston. And that is an incredible megalithic site. You have a lot of structures in New England as well. And then in New York State, you have what's called balanced rock, which is a dolmen. But if you're looking for circles, because that's what Nancy said about the circles, then really you're going to go to the Southwest. You're going to go to like Colorado and New Mexico and Nevada, and around the Four Corners area, where the ancient Anasazi peoples and Zuni First Nation created kivas, which are a round structure like a stone circle, but they're not standing stones, but they're a circular structure. And it was Major John Powell, an American soldier, and he was a formidable guy, and he had an accident where I think he lost his hand or his fingers, and he called them kivas. So it's not a Native American term, it's Tuzion is the Native American term. They're round structures that you can find throughout the Southwest, and they are very similar to standing stones. A stone circle proper, yeah. So kivas, look for kivas or tuzions.
Fantastic. And also, so everyone knows, Maria's information, of course, is down below, and she even generously offered her email address. So if you have questions, you can certainly pop her a question. Is that fair, Maria?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Yes. And I try to help people find places, because there really are a lot in the United States, and a lot got destroyed during the railroad building phase.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Oh my goodness. All right. So Eric asks a question. Was the Druid line broken?
That's a really, really good question. Erica, wasn't it?
Eric.
Yes.
Eric.
Eric, sorry. Yes, that is a good question because the Romans, according to history, rounded up all of the Druids and chased them, if you will, and tracked them down to Anglesey, which is an island just above North Wales, and was said to have killed them all. Okay, that was what Caesar said. But some of them literally got away and didn't go to Anglesey anyway, and the Druid line went on. And in between the kind of Druid period to the onset of Christianity, you had a breakaway Druid branch called the Chaldees. Okay, and the Chaldees were the people that kind of kept the mystical side of earth energies going. And to the Druids, you would be taught at a core, C-O-R, a Druid core. And these cores now are Oxford University was a Druid core. Chartres Cathedral in France was a Druid core. And the Druids, for instance, to get their wisdom carried on, would study for 3 years. That's a degree, a 3-year degree. Everything was done in Druids in 3s. And then if you got taught for 6 years, you became a doctor. That's where we get the PhD from. It all comes from Druidry. So yes, to answer Eric's question, yes, they did. They became some of them became the Chaldees, and some still remained true to their Druid Celtic belief system and carried on Druidry even in Christian times. There were still Druids active in the stone circles and in the groves, communicating to the trees and listening to nature.
And here you are alive and well, and you're a Druid, so we know that it's that fills me with energy. Linda, did you have anything that you wanted to add before we ask my final or give my final prompt here?
Yeah, I just want to also say, going to any of the Native American ruins that are there are so many circles. In every single one, you'll find the kivas, or like I remember going to Farmington and having the huge circle in the ground that they really didn't at that time have a full explanation of. So, and walking into those with just that, tell me what I need to know, let me feel this, is just the vibration and the feeling that you have is like no other. It's just incredible. So yes, anything with that. I had lots of experiences, a child going through.
Oh, all right.
And I was in Farmington last month, Linda.
Yes,
it's true. I stayed in Farmington. Yeah, it's beautifully said, actually. I mean, that is just so, it is whatever ancient site worldwide, if you just listen to those beautiful words that have been said, then, you're halfway there to receiving gifts, fairy gifts, we call them, from the ancient sites.
And we brought up in the conversation just a couple times, maybe we can talk about next time, is labyrinths. And the creation of labyrinths.
Yes. I mean, yeah, they're fascinating, subject matter, labyrinths, and incorporate a lot of sacred geometry as well. And yes, so we certainly can.
Maria, before we go, I do have one final question. I think it ties everything together. I really, really do. So what is the benefit of a circle? Why a circle? Why are
That's a great question.
Why are all these sites built in a circle? Why not squares or triangles? Why the circle?
That is a great question, a fundamental one as well, truly fundamental. Because if you imagine that deep water that I was talking about earlier, that yin water that gives a spiral pattern, surrounding the spiral pattern, if you've got a lot of water under pressure, it generates a circle of power. Yeah, so you imagine that circle of power. And so what the ancients did, they just put the standing stones round that circle of power, you know. And so yeah, so the reason why they're circular shape is because Gaia emits a powerful circular shape that the ancients tapped into. And next time we'll start talking about a circular ley system that was discovered in the megalithic landscape of the British Isles, because again we're thinking of lines. And that's quite fascinating. And also, you know, with a circle, we know it has no beginning, it has no end. And then in terms of energy, like I mentioned earlier, that energy comes out of the ground, yeah. And we'll talk next week about how the megaliths can transmit earth energy. Yeah, so you've got the megalith, my glasses, you've got the megalith in the circular energy pattern, and then that can transmit across the landscape. Yeah. And so yes, but it's all about the circular shape. So thank you for bringing that up. That's Gaia's magical circles.
Right. Awesome.
Fantastic. And so my final question to you, Maria, is what would you like to share to our audience before we go from your heart to ours?
Well, you know, you don't have to be an ancient site to tap into the wisdom of Gaia. You really don't. You know, just go by a tree, go out, kick your shoes off, you know, ground yourself, smell the earth, the wind in your hair, the sun on your face, the taste of clear water. All of these things are accessible, and the wind aeromancy can talk to us. And, you know, so there's so many elements that we can tap into. Even if you light a fire tonight, think about just looking at those flames. What can you see and what is said?
Perfect. That is perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Maria. And I'm going to toss the mic to Linda. I'll put us in Brady Bunch view so that everyone can see us as a collective here. And Linda, yeah, please start our gratitudes. We have so much to be grateful for today. You're the gift today, Miss Maria.
You are.
Oh my God, if I was ever on the turn, it would be for you.
Absolutely. And as Maria noticed, we have an amazing audience that asks incredible questions. They're already building them up for next time. So thank you, everyone, for the wonderful, thoughtful questions that you bring and for the conversations that you had for and with each other on the side to help bring even more to this group. If you know people who will be interested in part 2, please invite them to our next one. And Kat, do you want to talk about that also before I go?
Yeah,
check out the links below.
Check out the links below, please.
For Angela.
Am I muted?
Coffee for Kat and our wonderful show. Yes, all that. But for now, Kat, tell us about next week so that we can we're all holding on.
Well, next week is it's more Maria. We'll call the show More Maria. But I mean, there are questions I didn't get to. What's that?
I just said, oh, wow, yeah, you're funny.
Oh,
I mean that in a nice way, by the way.
Right. No, I'm a comic at heart. But we've talked, I want to talk about geopathic stress and German research that was ignored. I want to talk about negative green energy with Maria. And I want to talk about dowsing rods and pendulums. And of course, we're going to get into that, and we're going to have some live demonstrations because I have struggled with that. And it's just, I know it's just me, I'm in the way, but to have, you know, someone, a master teacher in the virtual room, clearing the dust out of my head so I can be successful, another gift, pure gift. So, so that is what we're going to do. So with that, thank you, everyone.
When?
Go ahead. Oh, that's a good call. Next Sunday, we're going to do Sunday instead because Maria has got a talk on our regular time. So it'll be 9 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. And that's 5 p.m. British BST if you're watching in England. So, all right. And with that, again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Linda. Freaking amazing questions and insights. And of course, thank you, Maria. We love you. Take care. We'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.